Hello, this is Georgina Rose, and welcome to the Dr. Darling YouTube channel. On this channel, we discuss everything related to magic, mysticism, the occult, religion, and everything on the fringe of esoterica. And in this video, I will be discussing a question that I don't think I've ever answered before, even though it is so simple and so essential. And that is, so wait, how does magic work? I talk a lot about magic, but I think without the answer to this question, your practice is going to lack direction. So I will be attempting to answer it in as much detail as I can in this relatively short YouTube video. Of course, there is more nuance and different traditions have different opinions, but I'm going to try to summarize the general consensus as best I can. I am your host, Georgina Rose, part-time esoteric content creator and part-time surfer of the Enochian Aethers. That's what I do when I'm not recording. And let's get into it. So to ask what is magic is, I think, the first step to answering the question of how does magic work? Because if we can't come to an agreement on what magic means, there is no coherent way to say how it works, because we're talking about different things. And I think we first need to look at the different definitions of magic, because that's going to color the rest of this video. So the definition that is most popular in modern occultism is going to come from Aleister Crowley, the founder and prophet of the religion of Thelema, which is not a religion that all occultists subscribe to. And it did come relatively late in occult history. It is from the late Victorian, early Edwardian period, and it is a specific set of beliefs. And occultism has a much longer history, and people have been doing magic for a much longer time. So if you're following a modern tradition, this is probably the definition that you're running off of. If you're following something older, you probably will dispute this definition. But his definition, as he phrased it, though he phrased it a little more poetically than this, is basically magic is when you use your will, and by that he meant the true will, the will of the soul, to enact change. And that could mean a lot of things. That could mean ritual magic, or that could mean simply doing a lot of things, right? If your will is set to something, since that will has a metaphysical core, which I'll get into in a second, that is a magical act. Now, some traditions don't like that definition because it is fundamentally an incredibly broad definition. It includes things that most people don't mentally think of when they think of magic. Most people, when they mentally think of magic, think of things like natural magic, theurgy, Goetia, and I mean Goetia both in the Solomonic sense and in the Greek sense of sort of darker magical practices, witchcraft, these type of things. That's what most people are thinking about. So if we're going to define that, we have to realize that there's going to be some complexity in that, because different traditions define that line different, because we're looking at the line between magic, mysticism, sorcery, virtuous theurgy, right? That distinction is really a present distinction in most traditional cultures. In Greece, people define magic in three categories. Really, the whole Hellenistic world used this. Theurgia, which is the divine magic of the gods, which is sort of like, you know, doing things like invocation, Orphic hymns, stuff like that. A lot of the mystery cults were theurgia, and they did actually consider that magic. And then there was Goetia, which they meant to refer to dark magic, what a lot of cultures will call it sorcery, or in Arabic, sahir, stuff like that, right? But that was also considered magic, just a different type of magic that was given a certain moral qualification based on the philosophies that those people believed. And then natural magic, which is using things like plants to make change and whatnot. Right? A lot of cultures will argue that magic is only when it does not meet some sort of level of virtue. And other cultures will say magic is just anything that uses these metaphysical powers to make change, which is what the Hellenists believed, right? The Hellenists argued that, you know, when you're using magic, whether it's theurgy or Goetia, you are using divine power to enact change in the world, not just your will. You're using things beyond your will, though your will is obviously part of that. Now, other cultures will say if it is for a righteous reason or in line with God, it ceases to become magic and becomes mysticism. This is big in like the Arabian world, specifically post-Islam. They will argue that Sufism is like mysticism. And there are a lot of Sufi things that enact change. There are certain talismans that are used, certain du'as or statements, repeating a name of Allah a certain number of times, right? That will enact change, but they won't define it as magic because it is in alignment with Allah and it is halal or permissible. Whereas if you were to do sahir or sorcery, which it's debated on where this line is, then it is actually magic in this negative sense, right? It's a bad thing. So, you know, you've got that complexity, right? In the West, you don't always see this, but post-Christian conversion, you know, there's a lot of people that would make that argument too. They would say, like, you know, what saints do is miracle working or wonder working, but it's not magic, right? The magic of, you know, women and men out in the woods of England, right, in the 1700s, right, that's different than miracle working, even though they both are enacting change. So let's try to come up with a consensus from all of these different definitions. And I think the consensus is, hear me out, using your will in a divine sense, not necessarily your will in a more secular sense. I think that, like, necessarily wishing for something that is happening, I don't know if that necessarily falls into magic, unless you are wishing for it with a divine nature of your will. I think there is a necessary divinity to make it magic. I think magic has to have a divinity to it, or otherwise it is not magic. Whether it is a divinity coming from yourself that connects to something higher, or completely external, right, calling upon a spirit to make something happen. Then it enacting definite, clear change. So where I'm going to draw the line between something that is magic and something that is pure mysticism that has no magical nature to it is that it is enacting a visible and clear change. That could be a change in the material world, like getting a job. That could be a more metaphysical change, like your behavior changing as a direct result. But if it is simply to get close to God or get close to a God and there's no change being enacted, I would consider that pure mysticism devoid of magic. Magic has to necessitate that there is some sort of change made. So that is my definition of magic, and that is what I will be working off of, because I think that is a consensus. You can moralize magic, but I think the better way to moralize magic is to do it in the way that the Hellenists did, right? Good magic versus bad magic, Goetia versus Theurgia, you know what I mean? Rather than say, like, magic's inherently when it's bad, because you run into this problem in the Islamic world where you have a lot of scholars debating on what is the line between mysticism and whatever, right? It creates a lot of problems. It creates a lot of theological problems. So that is the definition that I will be using. You can argue in the comment section if you want. But what is the first thing that makes that work? And that is, of course, the will. We have to discuss the will first. So every human has will, and will is not want. This is a mistake that a lot of people have made. And, you know, I see why people have made this. I think there are certain statements people have made that make it seem that way. But when I talk about will, I'm talking about something metaphysical. Within you, you have a drive, and that drive is not just something like desire, right? Will is not desire. Will is something you were given and that inherently links you to the higher planes of existence, because I believe in an emanationist framework, right? I believe everything begins at a point, emanates outwards, and then downwards into humanity, and that we all have a divine spark inside of us. Now, that divine spark links to something higher, and one of the ways the divine spark exists is through our will, because we are a physical body, but we are also a body of light, a metaphysical body, an energetic body. And because of that, we are metaphysical beings. We are not as powerful as gods. We are not gods, right? There is, of course, a little bit of divinity inside of us, but we're not gods, we're not equivalent, not all spirits are equivalent. There is a obvious and clear hierarchy of being, right? There is a hierarchy, it does exist, and that's objective. But because we have that bit of divinity, our will has a metaphysical nature to it. And with our will, we can actually enact change directly. This is how things like manifestation work, right? People manifest, they're like, I own a nice car, I have a good job. That is a statement that is in line with their will, and they repeat it and repeat it and repeat it until it embeds in their subconscious and embeds in their metaphysical body, and then manifests itself in the material world. As well, a lot of folk magical practices that do not involve the direct invocation of spirits work on a similar type of logic. You are using your will to make the change. There are other aspects at play in a lot of these things, and I'll get to that in a second, but that will, the pure will itself, is doing a lot of the work. And your will, you all have, even if you are someone who is weak-willed, you don't know how to harness it, you don't understand it, it is still inside of you. There is no human without a will. You just need to connect to the willpower. And once you connect to your will, pretty much anything is possible. When you are living in alignment with the fate that the gods set to you, and your will matches your fate, because we do all have fates, I believe that. The gods, they strung our fate together for us. When your will aligns with your fate, everything flows and things tend to just naturally work out. When you are running contrary to your will and contrary to your fate, that is when problems emerge, and that is where a lot of suffering begins. But if you can align this, things go really, really well. And so you really just need to understand your will and harness it in order to make a change in the material world. But A lot of magical practices do work in a more complex way than that. Because as humans, we are not the highest form of divinity, right? We are limited in what we can do. Your will alone does have some limitations on what it can do magically. And so that's why you would turn to some other stuff and some more complex metaphysical things. I am not a believer that, you should do the simplest way to get things. In some cases, you don't need anything complicated, but for a lot of things, there is a reason why you might want to get something a little more complicated. And so the next law that I think really governs why magic works is the law of correspondence, or the law of as above, so below. As above, so below is an hermetic axiom that is critical to the Western understanding of magic. And that is basically the idea that everything is interrelated. When we look at an emanationist framework, we understand that everything is connected in this way, and everything returns back to the source point. So, when something happens on one chain of being, it is affecting the rest of the chain of being because everything is linked and hierarchical. So if something in the heavens changes, something in the material world and things below the material world also change. This is why astrology works. And this is, in my opinion, the most coherent definition for astrology. And that would be that the planets moving affects our lives because when they move, something metaphysically happens and it affects us directly. Now, this does not actually, and I've thought about this a lot, there's sort of two frameworks that people explain astrology through, this one and then the other one. The other one is a more Eastern understanding, but I think it actually does blend together, and this is a sort of realizations I've had recently, and that is the idea of the celestial rays. So they believe that the highest God, the highest point of divinity, created the planets, and the planets reflect down that point of divinity onto this world, and the rays themselves enact the material change. If you think about it, these things don't run contrary because what is happening above is affecting what's below. The rays of divinity down from the Godhead are affecting us literally through the rays. That's still as above, so below. And if we want to get into how magic works, you basically run this in reverse, because if it can run one way, it can run the other way, because we are also emanations of divinity. And in a celestial rays stance, the existence of the Godhead shines off of us as well, because the Godhead is inside of us. It is above us, it is superior to us, we worship it, but we are still imbued with it. That is why there is no part of me is not of the gods is an expression that actually makes quite a bit of sense, because Godhead, I'm using God in the highest form of divinity sense, not in a Abrahamic monotheistic sense. I believe in soft polytheism. I believe all the different gods are faces of the single oneness. Historically, pagans use the single word God, so I feel okay using it. I'm gonna just steal that term back, right? It reflects out of us too. So you can do this in reverse, right? And so when we go and we think about what things correspond to, because obviously everything is interconnected, everything links, you can take something that links and then affect an outer link, right? The easiest way to explain this is through the idea of natural magic, which is kind of the type of magic using plants, herbs, all this stuff, right? We know that all the herbs correspond to planetary things, to different properties, right? And so if you were to take mugwort, that's a common plant, it grows all over, North America, and I also believe it grows in Europe too. It's kind of everywhere. It's like this invasive plant, but it corresponds to the moon, emotions, femininity, dreams, all this stuff, right? So if you are to take mugwort and you are to use mugwort in a ritual, you are representing this correspondence of the moon in this small scale. And so when you manipulate it, when you do things, and then when you infuse it with your divine will and the intrinsic divinity of that correspondence, they all link, they fuse together, and it creates an effect in the outer world. Now, another thing that I think I should bring up about plants, and that's going to bring us into the next reason as to why magic works, is outer forces, exterior forces, forces higher than us. Because as we know, divinity is hierarchical. We are not the only thing in the universe, right? So, what else is out there? And that would be spirits. So, a lot of things have a spirit to them. Animism is, of course, the most primitive version of religion. It is the first religion that humanity created. But every religion does kind of come back to animism. There is a sort of sense of interconnectedness in almost every single religion, right? Even to say that God created everything, thus everything is a creation and thus valuable, right? That's an animistic kind of taken away. It's a much more evolved animism. It's a much more complex animism. Emanationism, once again, it's like a more complex, metaphysically rich understanding of animism. But the principle, the fundamental principle is there, that there is a spiritual nature to everything, and everything kind of has a spirit to it. We will understand that plants have spirits, right? Tree spirits, river spirits, all of that is real, and every single plant has a spirit to it. There's a writer, a sabbatic writer named Scholke, who argued that there was an idea called, I believe it was him who said this, I think so, I'm going to cite him because I believe that is correct, that there is this idea of phytonosis, right? By connecting to a plant and understanding it and developing a relationship with it, you are able to work with the spirit of it itself, and that spirit allows things to work even stronger than if you were just using the plant as a standby. So you have your plant, it has the correspondence, but the plant itself is a spirit. And so you are using that spirit in order to make change, whether you are conscious of it or not. Being conscious of it definitely makes it stronger, but it is there. As well, we understand that there are gods, right? There are gods, and you as a magician, as an occultist, as a mystic, are capable of calling upon the gods. There is no limitation there. There are several ways to call upon the gods and to call upon other spirits. When you're calling upon a god, you are going to be doing something called invocation, which is calling the god into you and assuming the god form. So what you'll do is you'll say a specific prayer, you'll light some offerings, you'll call that god down, you'll interact with them, you'll interface with them, and you'll essentially ask them to intercede on your behalf in order to make some sort of change in exchange for offerings and devotion. Now, when I say in exchange, I don't want people to think that it's a wholly transactional thing, because when you get too transactional with your understanding of religion, you kind of get into toxic places, and that is missing the fullness of divinity, because fundamentally, our relationship with the gods are relationships. They are gives and takes. There are backs and forths, just like your relationship with any human who is kind of higher than you, right? You kind of someone who is above you, right? And you can develop this really rich love for the gods, all these things. It's so important. And you can use the gods in order to make magical change. You absolutely can. Even prayer itself, whenever you are, a kid in church, and you pray and you ask for something, you are doing that. Of course, it can be as simple as that, or it can be as elaborate as an invocation in a ceremonial ritual context or in an initiation. But it is all the same thing. We are asking out of love and desire for the gods to do something for us. They may not. They are under no obligation to. They are more powerful than us. And often when the gods reject one of our asks, it's for our greater good, very frequently. So, yeah. Now, the other way you would call on a spirit is through evocation. You are not going to be evoking gods. That does not make sense. What you will be evoking, though, is lesser spirits. So I said there are the gods. Now, underneath the gods, there are a lot of different types of lesser spirits, right? That would be angels, that would be demons, that would be jinn, that would be all these type of spirits, right? These non-God related spirits, and some of them are absolutely more powerful than others. And so what you can do is you can call upon a god or, the Godhead itself, the highest point itself, to basically throw a lesser spirit outside of you and trap it temporarily inside something outside of your ritual circle. And then you use that higher power to command the lesser power to do something for you, right? This is a much more forceful way to do things. And I find that this is a method for things that are a little more quick and dirty. I've just found that works a little better because we're talking about spirits who are more equipped to do that. Now, you don't need to evoke every lesser spirit. Specifically, a lot of people have very devotional relationship with angels. A lot of people who use jinn don't use a traditional evocation method. They use kind of like a slightly different method. Like you'll say these Quran surahs so many times and then evoke without the circle and without the trapping, so literally. But, you can have different relationships with lesser spirits, but fundamentally you are asking them through this different method. If you think about how Christians pray to saints, they pray to saints incredibly differently than they pray to Jesus or God, right? Lesser spirits should be treated differently. And if they are a lesser spirit that poses a danger to you, like a demon, you should be evoking. You should not be invoking. That doesn't make sense. But you are once again using higher forces in order to make something happen. So that is how that magic would work. Now, a lot of magic is a combination of many of these techniques, right? And there are more techniques beyond this. But fundamentally, a lot of magic comes back to these ideas. So this is a quick and dirty explanation on why magic works and how magic works. I hope this is helpful, and I hope you were able to apply this to your practice. This has been your host, Georgina Rose. And like, comment, subscribe, and ring the bell. And if you're subscribed to 93 days, you will meet your holy guardian angel, and you'll never need to know why magic works because it'll just be done for you. You can see me on many platforms. I'm on Patreon. That's what runs this show. If you join the Patreon, you get all the videos early. You get extra videos every month. My ritual guides, my Yule ritual guide is up currently, and I'm about to release my January New Year's ritual guide, which is always full of new rituals to start your year off on the right foot. I also do monthly consultations for mentoring if you are interested in being mentored by me through monthly calls. I also am on Instagram, TikTok, Telegram, Substack. I host the podcast, The Postmodern Iconoclast, which you can find on this channel and on most podcasting platforms. And yeah, I'm on everywhere. I don't think there's anywhere that I'm not. So have a nice day, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!